Well, you know what they say about assumptions, right? Like, get ready to have yours totally flipped because we
Yeah.
are diving into a career that seriously has way more going on than you'd think. Like, way more. Funeral service directors, RoleCatcher's career library. It's got a ton of info on this one. And honestly, after going through everything you gave me, I'm seeing this whole field in a totally new light.
Yeah, it's a profession that people just don't get, like it's
Yeah.
just this somber, serious stereotype. But when you really look at it, it takes this unique blend of emotional intelligence, you've got to have the logistics down pat,
Yeah.
and even you need like a dash of creativity in there to really succeed.
Okay, so you're already hitting on something that jumped out at me too. When I first saw coordinating the logistics of funerals, that's how the guide puts it, I thought, okay, pretty straightforward, right? Then it's like, bam, legal matters, working with cemeteries, even the tech side of crematoriums. It's a lot more complex than I ever pictured.
Exactly. And it's so interesting how that actually plays into the essential skills the guide talks about,
Yeah.
like social perceptiveness. That's huge. Think about it.
Hmm.
You're working with families during just the most emotional times in their lives, right?
Yeah.
Reading those subtle cues and adapting to what they need right there on the spot. It's not just like checking boxes on a list. It's like genuine empathy in action,
Hmm.
you know?
Totally. And speaking of empathy in action, the interview prep section really brings it home. Like they ask potential directors how they would handle these tough conversations with families who are grieving. Like, how do you even begin to address those really difficult questions or handle sensitive requests and do it all with compassion and grace? That just takes a whole other level of expertise and pressure.
Yeah, for sure.
Have you ever seen like examples of how those scenarios would actually play out in real life?
Absolutely. The guide actually uses this really powerful example, a family that is totally divided over what their loved one wanted.
Yeah.
And it really highlights that delicate balance a funeral director needs to find,
Yeah.
honoring what each person wants, but also helping the family kind of come together and agree.
Yeah.
And through all of that, they're also navigating their own grief. It's like they become this source of support and expertise during such a tough time.
Wow. That's intense. It makes total sense, but it's not something you would immediately think about? It's clear that you need like a deep well of, let's just call it emotional agility to deal with all that.
That-
Because you're not just managing logistics, you're dealing with people's hearts too?
Exactly. And that's why this career, while super demanding, can also be so rewarding. You're not just planning events, you're helping people find closure, create these meaningful tributes and really navigate a huge life transition.
That reminds me of the pros and cons section. And you're totally right. Emotionally demanding is definitely on the list. But then you have the other side, job security, lots of room to grow in your career, even the creativity. Designing these personalized services,
Yeah,
it's this unexpected mix of, I don't know, somber and uplifting.
absolutely. It really makes you constantly check your perceptions. You're dealing with the weight of loss, but also this beauty of legacy and remembrance. It's about helping families create something positive from a really hard experience.
Yeah.
And that can be incredibly fulfilling.
And it's not just the emotional part of it all, the practical side, like the actual nuts and bolts of the job. That surprised me too. I mean, we talked about the legal stuff earlier, but the guide gets into some serious detail about working with cemeteries, managing the tech at crematoriums. There's a whole other side to this, like a secret world of expertise.
Oh, totally. And all that technical stuff is always changing too. Like the guide mentions these software programs, they use them for everything. Coordinating with funeral homes and cemeteries, keeping track of digital records, even making those personalized memorial websites.
Hold on. Memorial websites. Okay, now that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
You're saying this field is like embracing technology in ways I never even thought about. Tell me more about this techie stuff. What other surprises are hiding in a funeral director's like digital toolbox?
Well, just think about all the back and forth that goes into planning a funeral.
Right.
All the communication, the coordination. The guide talks about how these software platforms really streamline all the
Yeah.
directors can connect with families, clergy, florists, caterers, everybody involved.
Wow.
And it's all in this really organized, efficient way.
Mm.
So it's really about using tech to reduce stress and free up mental space for the emotional side of things.
Okay, so I'm starting to get it. Technology actually helps with the human element here. It doesn't replace it. That's really interesting. So it makes me think, what about the future? Does the guide talk about how tech might change things even more down the road?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The guide even mentions virtual memorial services and online tributes, especially now with, our global world and everything. It's about finding new ways for people to grieve and remember, even if they can't be there in person. And then there's the whole thing with those interactive digital archives.
Okay, now we're talking.
Families could use them to preserve and share stories about their loved ones, for future generations.
Wow. Interactive archives, virtual memorials. It's like the guide is giving us a sneak peek into the future of how we remember people.
Right.
And it's funny because when I first thought about doing this deep dive, I was expecting it to be, all about being serious and traditional. And while that's definitely a part of it, I'm surprised by how much innovation is involved, too. It's like this field is honoring the past, but also completely embracing the future.
Yeah, you got it. It's like this balancing act.
Hmm.
They have to honor traditions, but also adapt to what families need today. And that takes a willingness to learn and change and to be creative within a system that's usually seen as very, I don't know, structured.
Yeah, totally. And speaking of creativity, let's go back to something we talked about before, how funeral services can be really personalized. The guide mentioned that some funeral directors even have a background in event planning or design. It's not just about following a script, it's about creating a tribute that truly reflects the person's life and passions.
Absolutely. It's about really understanding the story of that person's life and finding ways to tell that story through the service.
Yeah.
Actually, the guide has this really touching story about a funeral director who helped a family incorporate their loved one's love of sailing into the memorial service. They even use nautical charts and model ships as decorations. It's those little touches that make such a big difference.
I love that.
Right.
Like you said, finding those beautiful parts of a person's legacy within the sadness of loss. And I can imagine that takes a lot of sensitivity. You have to be able to read people and figure out what they need, even if they don't say it out loud.
Exactly. And that takes us back to emotional intelligence, right?
Mm.
The guide really stresses how important that is in this field.
Mm.
It's about active listening, being empathetic, and connecting with people who are grieving. And everyone grieves differently.
Which brings us back to that whole pros and cons list again. The emotional toll, the crazy hours, the possibility of burnout. It's all in the guide. And it's important to be realistic about those things. But then you have the other side, the impact you can have, that sense of purpose, knowing you're helping people through one of the toughest things they'll ever go through.
Yeah, it's a career that stays with you. And I think the guide really gets that across. It's more than a job. It's like a calling.
That's a great way to put it. And it makes me think about those interview questions again. Imagine being asked, why this? Why funeral services?
Mm,
After this deep dive, I feel like I would see it in a whole new way.
me too, for sure.
And anyone listening, if this has ever crossed your mind, even for a second, you're probably feeling that shift too, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And for anyone who's a little bit curious, remember, RoleCatcher is the place to go.
Absolutely.
All things career exploration, that's where it's at. Detailed guides, interview tips, salary info, it's all there.
They make it so easy.
RoleCatcher really takes the guesswork out of figuring out your career path.
Yeah. They give you the tools and information you need to make good choices about your future. I got to say, when we first decided to dive into the world of funeral directors, I thought, ooh, this is going to be heavy. But honestly, I'm kind of surprised by how energized I feel. Like this whole deep dive has been eye-opening, inspiring even. I feel like I have a totally new appreciation for this job and for the people who do it,
It's amazing, right? It's
Yeah.
one of those careers that nobody really thinks about, but it's so important to, our society. It's about being there for people during these huge moments in their lives with compassion and respect.
Yeah, and what's really incredible is that it takes this crazy balance. Like
Okay.
on one side, you've got the logistics, the technology, the business side of it all, but then you also need empathy and creativity and this ability to connect with people so deeply.
Exactly. And the guide talks about that a lot, the emotional intelligence part. You have to remember that each family grieves in their own way. There's no one right way to do this job.
Yeah.
It's about really being present and adapting to the needs of each person. It's like funeral directors are kind of like emotional architects. They help families take all those raw emotions, the grief, the loss, the memories, and build something meaningful from it. A ceremony, a tribute, a way to heal and connect.
Wow, that's a great way to put it. And it brings up something that people often miss, the creative side of it all. It's not just tradition. It's about making each farewell unique.
Yeah.
Telling a life story in a way that feels real and true to the family.
And I think that's what's resonating with me so much. Yeah, there's sadness, there's grief, but there's also this sense of purpose. Like you're making a real difference when people need it most. It is, like you said before, it's not just a job, it's more like a calling.
It is, and it takes a lot of strength, a lot of compassion. The guide doesn't pretend it's easy. Oh, The long hours, the emotional toll, burnout, it's all there.
Yeah.
But it also highlights the really rewarding parts for you and for the families.
And thinking back to those interview questions, it all makes sense now. They're not just looking for someone who's organized or knows the law. It's deeper than that. They want people with heart,
Mhm.
empathy, people who can just connect with others during tough times.
Absolutely. They're looking for that human touch,
Right.
someone who can be there with grace and sensitivity. And I think if anyone's out there thinking about this career, that's something to really think about. It's not just about the tasks, it's about who you are as a person.
It's about answering that call to be there for others, to guide them, to be a source of comfort when things are changing so much.
Yeah, to be a steady presence during a really uncertain time.
Exactly.
Well, I think it's safe to say that our deep dive into the world of funeral directors has shown us a profession that's both incredibly human and surprisingly innovative. It challenges how we see things. It reminds us about compassion and connection and, how to honor a life well lived.
I couldn't agree more. And for everyone listening, who knows? Maybe this has sparked something new for you, or maybe it's given you a new way of looking at a path you've already been thinking about. Whatever it is, remember that RoleCatcher is the place to go for all things career exploration. They've got the resources, the information, and the guidance you need.
Absolutely.
So whether you're just starting or you're ready for that next step, RoleCatcher's there to help.
Every step of the way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And with that, it's time for us to wrap up this honestly, unexpectedly inspiring deep dive. Until next time, keep those assumptions in check, because you never know what fascinating corner of the professional world we'll be exploring next.